Feinting is an essential skill in fighting. It causes an opponent to react to a fake attack that's never coming, opening them up for the real strike. Feints can be thrown in a variety of different ways. You can use a feint to block the vision of an opponent, or use it to put them into a bad position. You can feint to draw an expected counter, so that you can in turn counter the counter. A timing feint involves altering the speed of the strike to catch an opponent by surprise. You can pause mid-movement to let your opponent finish their defensive maneuver and then attack. Or you can rapidly speed up the attack halfway through. You can even feint with your eyes, looking at the wrong target to deceive your opponent about your true intentions. But the least known feint is by far the most impressive, as it's executed with only one strike. This is the directional feint. The fighter loads up for one kind of strike, then alters the course of the blow midway through, giving their opponent no time to readjust. A good directional feint blends seamlessly into and amplifies the power of the original strike. The question mark kick is a prime example of a directional feint, turning a front kick into a roundhouse. The load up causes the opponent to defend the wrong kick, and then the real kick goes over and around their guard.
The Brazilian kick, made famous by Globe Feitosa, is fairly similar.
But Feitosa sells the front kick even better by partially extending his leg as if he were throwing a front kick, before rechambering it as he turns into a roundhouse. What's crazy is that Feitosa's rechamber not only adds more power to the kick, it also helps him to land by moving his shin out of the way, just as his opponent attempts to parry or check it. Andy Hoog used his axe kick in much the same way. Many opponents mistook the huge load-up to be a roundhouse kick, but the kick continued to circle back around and over their guard, slamming down onto their head. Razor Ruddock's smash punch is a great example of a directional feint from boxing. Ruddock loaded his punch well behind his back, then chambered it as if it were a hook or uppercut, and then finally straightened it as he drove it through his opponent's chin. In this clip, Roy Jones Jr. pulls off the same technique, but adds on one more layer by looping his punch to turn it into a hook at the last moment. A slightly more direct example comes from Sugar Ray Robinson, who often loaded up his uppercuts as if they were hook punches. He could also turn a looping hook into a straight cross. The more distinct and unexpected the angle change, the more surprising and effective it is. And the later the course of the blow is changed, the less time an opponent has to react and correct their defense. But ultimately, a fighter doesn't need to actually change the kind of strike to pull off a directional feint. Ernesto Hoost threw his leg kicks how many fighters throw head kicks, leaning far to the side with his shin near parallel to the floor. And whether it was intentional or not, using the same technique for both helped to disguise his head kick a great deal, causing his opponents to leg check rather than cover block. Canelo famously employs the same concept for his hooks, tricking fighters into blocking the wrong punch so that they create an opening for him. Roy Jones Jr. was also a big fan of this tactic. A fairly unorthodox example comes from Le Thuy, where fighters can blend head movement into a head butt. Directional feints can even be used to blend striking and grappling. In his fight against George Foreman, Muhammad Ali would often throw his jab slightly wide of Foreman's head on purpose, so that he could turn the retraction of his punch into a collar tie. And as much as Wilder's boxing skills are criticized, a great deal of his knockdowns were made possible by using his extended jab to pull down an opponent's guard, turning his jab into a trap. Here we see Wilder testing the same principle against a southpaw fighter. Because the fighters are in an open stance, Wilder must loop his jab to pull down the opponent's hand from the outside. However, it works just as well. In fact, if you're looking to add in directional feints, you can probably get the most bang for your buck by incorporating it into your jab. The great Lennox Lewis changed the direction of his jab mid-punch constantly. Lewis's jab often came up from his hip, and from there, he could turn the motion into more of a back fist, great for hiding a follow-up right, or loop it around to target the right eye, to cause the opponent to open their guard and clear a path down the middle. In this clip, Lewis raises his hand to entice his opponent to catch his jab, then pulls it back to go over the top. The possibilities are pretty much limitless. However, the directional feint is rare because it's hard to pull off. It requires excellent timing and reflexes, but most of all, a deep knowledge of the art. You must know when and how to use each strike in your arsenal, as well as how those strikes are most likely to be defended. Still, if you can pull it off, the directional feint is a skill well worth having in your toolkit. You can check out my books on footwork, defense, and power if you'd like to learn more. For the modern martial artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.